Okay, thank you, Laura, for the great introduction. It's really a pleasure to be here. I have to say, before I start in the talk, this trip's been much better than the last one. 3 years ago, I tried to come to a conference that Sarah had. Remember? I ended up in the hospital with the flu. I got passed out on the plane and ended up just getting here and going straight to the hospital, and then I left the hospital and went home. So it wasn't a great trip. This has been wonderful. So thanks for having me. Also, before I get started, too, I want you to take note of that's the UT Tower. That picture up here on the slides at the bottom of that. It's a really special week this week. The Pop Center's been in the tower for 35 years. Tomorrow is our last day there. And we moved to our new building that will be in next week. So I think, were you there when you moved into the tower? Or what? No. Okay. But Pop Center's been, but over the years it's gotten really nasty and bug infested, and so it's going to be wonderful to have our new space. So big week for us. Okay. So in today's talk, I'm going to summarize work to date on a recently funded project from the MacArthur Foundation that's taking a fresh look at Hispanic adult health and mortality. The project really is focused on 3 long-term goals. By we, I'm the PI, and Mark Hayward is the co-PI, and we're working with a number of students on this. 3 long-term goals of the project. The first is describe accurately Hispanic health and mortality patterns among the U.S. Hispanic population. That's a lot of what we focused on so far, and it's not an easy thing to do. Second, how and why do Hispanic health and mortality patterns differ within group? Do a little bit of that here today, and when compared to other race and ethnic groups, and eventually when compared to Mexico, which we haven't touched on very much at all yet. The third and most important goal of the long-range project is to use this work to project ahead. With Hispanic population growth, looking ahead to 2050, the MacArthur Foundation is really interested in how will Hispanic health and mortality patterns influence what health and mortality patterns for the U.S. population will look like in mid-century. So by establishing what a good foundation for what we know now, we can better project ahead what things might look like into the future. That's the ultimate goal of this project. We haven't touched upon that yet. For today's talk, first, I'm going to do 4 things. I'm going to produce independent estimates of Hispanic adult mortality and life expectancy at age 50. These are different than the National Vital Statistics System, which Elizabeth Arias recently published the first ever Hispanic life tables for the U.S. population just 2 years ago. So I'm going to compare our estimates to hers. Second, I'm going to look at a couple key sets of factors that differentiate Hispanic adult mortality patterns from blacks and whites. Focus on socioeconomic differences across groups, and focusing on cigarette smoking, and building on one of a great paper by Laura Blue and Andy Fenlon that was published last year in this area. Third, I'm going to move beyond mortality and examine how Hispanic health outcomes, chronic conditions, and disability correspond with those of mortality to answer some interesting questions about still believability of the mortality data, and then if we do believe the mortality data, and I do, how does Hispanic disability align with that of mortality? Not great news there. And then the fourth thing, I think if you want to fall asleep until the end, is fine. This I think is the most important thing, is where I'm just going to speculate about concerns looking ahead and future research implications. I don't see good news ahead here, and I'll talk about some of those reasons why. Through some of the data that we see today and through some of the other outside things that I'm working on, and others are as well. And so laying out some questions looking ahead in terms of Hispanic health and mortality. Okay, the motivation for the study is threefold. First, there's continued methodological and substantive debate regarding the Hispanic paradox, largely spurred by prominent papers by Alberto Poloni and his colleagues. Second, the publication of the first official Hispanic life tables. This is a monumental accomplishment. Took Elizabeth Arias at the NCHS years and years to do this. But now we have those that benchmark data, and we can compare other survey-based estimates to the official data. And third, and again, going back to the MacArthur Project, it's rapid growth and substantial socioeconomic disadvantage among the Hispanic population. There's great concern regarding their future health and mortality prospects. So we talk a lot about the Hispanic paradox, the good patterns of health and mortality that we see in most data, including what you'll see here, but I don't necessarily think that that's the thing to focus on. Okay, so a little bit about framing the debate. Alberto and Jeff Mornoff published an important paper in 2001 where they criticized an important body of work on the Hispanic paradox. They called it a slippery idea, a moving target of sorts. There's all kinds of differences about which groups are people comparing to which groups. The outcomes of interest varied all over the place. The ages varied all over the place. So they said, okay, what we ended up here with is a mishmash of findings and studies that we need to be very careful with. And basically, to me, that paper was a call to be as careful as possible in this research. Get the facts right first, and before we can expand upon looking at small groups and third and fourth generation outcomes and so forth. Let's get the facts right first before getting too specific. Second, Poloni and Arias later argued that they solved the Hispanic paradox in a lead paper in Demography in 2004. Basically, their analysis led them to conclude that the Hispanic paradox, mortality paradox, is only true among foreign-born Hispanics and only because of poor data. Basically, they showed a shallow age gradient. Mortality didn't go up with age like it should for foreign-born Mexicans, and this probably indicated a salmon bias, that people who participated in the survey went home, went to Mexico, and died there, so their deaths were not recorded in the United States. Okay, so they can, as a result, it can end up with lower mortality than what's really the case. They also said the Hispanic paradox was not true among U.S.-born Hispanics. But if you look at the paper, they show equivalent mortality between U.S.-born Hispanics and whites, which is perfectly consistent with the definition of the paradox. I think they simply got that wrong. The salmon bias major finding was also countered by a great paper by Cassiotura and Irma Elo, and by work that I did and Jenny Van Hook did as well. So I'm not sure that is the best explanation, and I'll follow up on that today. In the end, what I'm going to end up using is an enhanced version of the same data set that Alberto and Elizabeth used. The National Health Interview Survey links to the longitudinal mortality follow-up data, and take a fresh look at Hispanic mortality patterns for ages 50 and above where there's thick data. Okay, and I think some of the problems that they may have run into was by looking at earlier adult data where there just wasn't that many deaths. Okay, but also heeding Alberto's call about defining the paradox. I don't want this to be a slippery slope. I want it to be as clear as possible. Went back to the original definition. Marquez and Coriel, in a classic paper in '86, defined the paradox as the health status of Hispanics is much more similar to, note that they don't say advantaged, okay, and you see a lot of that wording in a lot of papers in this area. It's much more similar to the health status of other whites than that of blacks, although socioeconomically the status of Hispanics is closer to that of blacks. And then they also importantly talked about the factors that explain the relative advantages or disadvantages, saying that there can be advantages or disadvantages, but overall the paradox is as defined here. Hispanic health and mortality patterns much more similar to whites than to blacks. So that's the definition I go by. Okay, second, I'll be very clear about the populations and outcomes of interest here as well. I'm exclusively looking at adults age 50 and above here for a couple of reasons. First, because mortality data, you need a lot of deaths. That's where deaths occur, fortunately. Second, ages 50 and above, there's also other data sets, the HRS in the United States and the MHAS, which Rebecca will talk about next week when I think she'll talk about the MHAS, which is the HRS equivalent in Mexico. Eventually we'll be able to look at kind of cross-border comparisons of aging and health as well. Don't focus on that today, although it's in one of the draft papers that I have, and I could send you some of the MHAS disability results that we do have. Okay, so everything I do is also sex specific because there's clearly different mortality, health, and sociodemographic correlates for each sex. Foreign-born, and the big comparisons here are between foreign-born Hispanics and U.S.-born Hispanic adults, okay, as I define there, with comparison groups of blacks and whites. Now let me note a little bit about the heterogeneity among Hispanics that I don't look at here. Along with a number of others, some very prominent people in this room, I've published on the importance of heterogeneity in Hispanic social and health outcomes by origin group, Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, Cubans, etc. I and many others have also done so with very small cell sizes. Okay. Others, including Juanita Chen, postdoc here, who worked with me at Texas, I miss Juanita, have also focused on other dimensions of heterogeneity among Hispanics, including race. Okay, an important dimension of heterogeneity that I won't touch on here. I'm taking a step back in the initial part of this project. I want to get the overall facts right. I don't want this to be a slippery slope. I want to do it based on defendable methodological choices and solid data. Underlying the patterns that I show you here, I have run parallel analyses for Mexicans, for Puerto Ricans, for Cubans. Pretty much everything I say here is true for Mexican immigrants in the U.S. and for U.S.-born Mexican Americans. They dominate the data. Over 60% of the people in the data sets are of Mexican origin. Where we run into problems with some of the Puerto Rican and Cuban cell sizes that just get real small and bouncy, and so I won't show you much here. But everything I'll show you here is focused on foreign-born and U.S.-born Hispanics. Eventually, as this project goes along, I'm adding data year by year. There's more mortality matches in the NHIS coming in probably in the spring of this year, and I'll continue to see how far I can push the data. Heterogeneity is really important. I don't deal with all of it here. Okay, to sum up the literature on this, if you want to get up to speed on the Hispanic paradox very quickly, Marquis and Eschbach wrote a great little chapter in the Handbook of Mortality, Handbook of Adult Mortality, Eileen Crimmins and Rick Rogers put out last year. They reviewed the literature and they said, they report the majority of evidence continues to support a Hispanic mortality advantage and that immigrant selection remains the most viable explanation. I agree with that, and I'll show you some data. But they also say data concerns remain, and I'll try to hit on that point here and with some, I think, some good data. Health behavior explanations don't seem to be the answer. I don't think that's necessarily correct, and Laura doesn't either, and I'll show you some reasons why. The role of SES for Hispanic health and mortality remains unclear. I'll try to shed a little light on that. And then some studies suggest that Hispanics may live longer than whites, but with more disability and poorer health. And that's one of the big concerns I have, and I'll show you some data on that. So today's talk is focused on those 4 issues that Marquis and Eschbach point to in their last review. Okay, so first, addressing data concerns. Oh, the pop center went upside down here. I don't know what happened. Anyway, part of the move. It's a mess right now. You don't want to be there. Try not to take the bugs with us. Okay. So addressing data concerns. A little bit on the new Hispanic life tables. First ever life tables. You know, NCHS puts out these reports every year. Okay. Never did so for Hispanics. Basically because of numerator-denominator issues. Okay. Numerators come from death certificates. People don't report themselves. Okay. Denominators come from census estimates where people tend to report themselves or someone in the household does. Okay, that mismatch has caused a lot of problems with mortality data among Hispanics and other minority groups. Okay, Elizabeth spent years doing the data best corrections for ethnic misclassification to date, and what she found is age-adjusted mortality 17% lower for Hispanics than whites, life expectancy at birth for Hispanics over 80, and this was 2.5 years higher than whites and about 8 years higher than blacks. She was surprised, Alberto was surprised, Marquides was surprised. This kind of caught everybody after all these corrections a little bit off guard. Okay, limitations are though that they didn't consider nativity here. Elizabeth is working on that right now, but nativity reports on death certificates are not good either. And there's limited confidence in Hispanic national origin estimates. And also, of course, using the vital statistics data, you can't look at covariates of Hispanic adult mortality. So I want to do alternative estimates, because then with survey-based data, you can examine some of the covariates as well. Okay, so if the mortality data aligns well with NCHS data, okay, then I think that gives us more confidence to proceed with a better understanding of the patterns. Okay, so here's the data I used. I mentioned it here. It's the 1989 to 2004, 16 NHIS cross-sections linked to follow-up mortality through 2006. So if you're in the survey, cross-sectional survey in, say, 1990, you're followed passively to see if you lived or died every year thereafter through the end of 2006. A new version of this data set will, like I said, come out in the spring. Have about over 4 million person years of observations. You need that for mortality studies because, fortunately, mortality is a fairly rare event. It happens once to everybody. And you got over 100,000 deaths, about 4,000 of whom were Hispanics. Okay, important point here, ineligibles are not included in the data set. These are people who appeared in the survey but didn't report enough good identifying information on themselves to ever link to a death certificate. Okay, missing names, missing social security numbers, missing other kinds of identification things. So NCHS takes those people out, they reweight the files, okay, to account for those missing people. And that's been an important addition, enhancement to the data set in this last round. Linkage quality between survey respondents and death records has been shown to be very good, although my graduate student, Joseph Laracy, showed that it's not quite as good for Hispanics as it is for whites and blacks. It's better for Hispanics if you look at older Hispanics. Okay, so looking at Hispanics in this data set of ages 20 or 25 or 35, the linkage to death records is not very good. For older adults, it's much better. And what Joseph did basically is played God. He killed off some people, he brought some other people back to life, and showed that for older people, it didn't matter so much if you, the disparities between groups didn't matter so much. Okay, in a nutshell, the data are pretty good for Hispanics. They're real good for Hispanics at older ages. Okay. Yeah. You know, that's a great question. It starts out back in 1989 and 1991 very small because people reported stuff back then. By the time you get to 2001, 2, 3, and 4, it was up, I may be off a little bit, up to somewhere around 12 or 14%. Okay? And so it has become a big issue in all these kind of data sets where there's passive linkages like this. And
what's the percentage among Latinos?
Among Latinos, it's higher. It's closer to 20%.
Because by the end of the 2010 decade, 60% of all Mexican immigrants present in the U.S.
Right, and we don't know that, of course. Many are in the data set. We don't, and I'll mention that issue when we get to the end about some ideas about getting at some of the questions about undocumented. I'll show you why. I am. I'm sure it's not perfect. Okay, here's Elizabeth's estimates from the vital statistics system at age 50. Okay, so at this point, Hispanic women live 2.3 years longer than white women and about 5 years longer than black women. Hispanic men live a little over 2 years longer than white men and about 6 years longer than black men. Okay, again, no nativity breakdowns in that data. Okay, in the data here, you look across to the new estimates. We have the overall figures for 3 groups look very similar to the vital statistics data. So in the NHIS LMF, Hispanic women live about 1.6 years longer than white women and 4.5 years longer than black women at age 50. And Hispanic men live 2 years longer than white men and about 5 years longer than black men. They line up really well. Now, maybe they shouldn't. NHS is centered around 1998-99. Okay, if you look at the time span, whereas the vital statistics estimates are based on 2006. I looked back at life expectancies, and life expectancy at age 50 has gone up about a year. Okay, over that. So it should be the case that the NHIS estimates should be about a year lower. okay, than vital statistics estimates. They're not. But keep in mind that the NHIS is the non-institutionalized population, okay? And I've done some other work that looks at life expectancy in this data, and at age 50, the life expectancy is about a year too high, okay? Balance those out, I'm pretty happy with these, okay? I couldn't have expected that they looked that good. Now, there's probably all kinds of slippage going on in all kinds of ways here. But at the same time, on balance, the E50 estimates are remarkably consistent with those of vital statistics. They're completely independent from one another. And if anything, they might understate E50 a bit for Hispanics in comparison to vital statistics data. Okay? So this gives me confidence to proceed. Okay? By nativity then, which vital statistics data don't do, foreign-born Hispanic women live 3 years longer than U.S.-born Hispanic women at age 50. 3-year difference. And about the same for foreign-born Hispanic men compared to U.S.-born Hispanic men. Okay. Still, the U.S.-born Hispanics look a lot like whites. Okay? It's a classic paradox, both for immigrant Hispanics as well as for U.S.-born Hispanics. Okay? Okay, I don't want to spend too much time on these mortality rate ratios, but I just wanted to show, it looks like a candy cane. But anyway, I wanted to show you, compare these 4 groups specific to age. The green is good mortality rate ratios, lower than whites. The red are bad, higher than whites, who are the comparison group here in each age, 5-year age group, okay? This is for women. As others have reported, foreign-born Hispanic advantage is concentrated at age 60 plus. The U.S.-born Hispanic women exhibit similar mortality to those of whites, all the way through the age range. Okay. For men, pretty similar findings. The foreign-born Hispanic advantage is consistent at 50 and 50 plus. U.S.-born Hispanics exhibit some higher mortality at 50 to 54. I don't show you here. I have the estimates going back to age 35, and the U.S.-born Hispanic men don't look good at those younger adult ages. And I'll speculate a little bit at the end about that as well. So those are what the rate ratios look like. Now, you can also glean some insights from cause-specific mortality as well, because you can start to think about, well, what are some of the mechanisms here that I'm going to move toward with SES and smoking? I just picked out one of the age groups here, 65 to 79. I had to put 15 years of age together, again, because of thin data issues. Lung cancer and respiratory causes are especially low for foreign-born Hispanics. The foreign-borns are the furthest to the left in each cause-specific group. You know, this is a smoking flag. Okay, lung cancer and respiratory causes mortality so low. Other major chronic causes are also low for foreign-born Hispanics that we show here. What's not on the slide, it's just getting too messy. External causes look like whites for foreign-born Hispanics, and the residual set of causes were higher. So there is some differences. U.S.-born Hispanics are equivalent with heart disease and stroke to whites, and higher for external and residual causes. But again, the causes most closely related to smoking, lung cancer and respiratory causes, both, especially foreign-born Hispanics, look really good. U.S.-born Hispanics look good as well in comparison to whites. Also look at men 65 to 79, similar patterns. Again, the smoking-related causes really stand out. U.S.-born Hispanics are inching above whites in heart disease and stroke, but the smoking flag is waving. Okay, so let's move toward explanation. First, nobody here needs to look at this very, very much. Everybody knows this, but just as a reminder, this is just percentages of socioeconomic disparities across to ages 50 plus. They're huge. Okay. Very poor SES profile of Hispanics, especially the foreign-born, but also the U.S.-born. This includes second generation, third, fourth. We don't know what generation folks are here. They identify as Hispanic and identify as U.S.-born. 57% of foreign-born Hispanics have less than high school education, and 42% of U.S.-born Hispanic women have less than high school education. Big disparities. You don't need to look at all this, but it's education, income. It's for women and men. Okay. Okay, what may be less known is looking at the smoking status by race and ethnicity, again, still using the NHS data, ages 50 and above. Never smoking, this is for women again, never smoking is over 75% for foreign-born Hispanic women. Okay, by far the highest, and it's the lowest among white women at about 53%. Big difference there in never smoking. Former smoking and current heavy smoking are exactly the opposite. Okay, for example, only 2% of foreign-born Hispanic women are heavy smokers compared to 10% of white women. Okay, big smoking differences across groups. And then for men, foreign-born Hispanics also exhibit the best profile, although not to the same extent as women. I could go through some of the details here, but if you look at never smoking on the far left, foreign-born Hispanics look the best, whites and blacks look the worst. Current heavy smoking, whites and blacks look the worst. The two Hispanic groups look the best. Sidetrack here for a minute. I'm involved in a data collection project with the American Legacy Foundation. We just collected the first couple waves of data, ages 18 to 34, looking at very detailed tobacco use patterns in the U.S. The U.S.-born Hispanics do not look good, especially the men. And it's one of the things that's very concerning looking ahead. The women don't look necessarily great either, look about the same as whites and blacks. But these patterns are not necessarily what we're going to see in the coming decades. Okay, these are the only regression results. Back to the commercial done. Back to the talk. These are the only regression results I'm going to show you. I hate this when people do this in talks, and I'll do it. I got two slides here, one for women and one for men. What I'm looking at here, these are proportional hazard regression models of mortality risk for ages 50 and above. Okay, comparing foreign-born Hispanics, U.S.-born Hispanics, and blacks to whites. The hazard ratios, that's kind of mashed together. The hazard ratios are, above 1 is bad, higher mortality than whites. The hazard ratios below 1 are good, lower mortality than whites. And the aim of this set of models is to help tease out how these socioeconomic variables that I showed you and the smoking variables impact mortality differentials for the two Hispanic groups and blacks compared to whites. Okay, we start with a foreign-born Hispanic advantage. 0.77 hazard ratio, 23% lower mortality risk for foreign-born Hispanic women compared to whites. It widens with SES controls. Everybody forgets in this literature, okay, that socioeconomic disadvantage harms Hispanic mortality. Okay, there's different slopes for the groups. Okay, Noreen published a great paper on that, and I've worked on that as well. But at the same time, if you equate just with these silly little measures here, Hispanics would look even better, both U.S.-born and foreign-born Hispanics, than they already do. Okay, socioeconomic disadvantage is important for their mortality. Further control for smoking, and you chip away at some of the Hispanic advantage, but it's kind of disappointing. Okay, I thought, well, lung cancer, respiratory causes, heart disease, all these things look pretty good for Hispanics. You control for smoking, and you don't chip away at much of that advantage. Okay, maybe it's a measure issue, but first let's look for men. You see the same kind of patterns. Okay, lower mortality, even lower control for SES. Smoking chips away at that. Equivalent mortality, U.S.-born Hispanics with whites. Better mortality once you control for SES, and smoking chips away at that a very little bit. Thinking, well, Laura and Andy are wrong. Smoking isn't that big of a deal. So, okay, maybe the measure's not good. Let's look at never smokers. People probably report that pretty well. Okay, in comparison to how much people are smoking and how much they smoked in the past and so forth. Let's pretend like there's never been smoking, and look at those people who claim to never smoke, and let's look at the life expectancies of these groups for never smokers. Okay. Caught up here. One would expect that life expectancies go up. If you compare to all the groups, if you only look at the never smokers, life expectancy should go up, and they do. If we go back 10 or so slides, these are taller bars. Okay. But mostly you get rid of the very heavy smoking whites, and especially men. Okay, their life expectancy goes up the most. Okay, foreign-born Hispanics would still have a mortality advantage over whites, first bar and the fourth bar. Okay. But it's about 50 to 67% smaller than the observed differences. Very consistent with what Laura and Andy published in the International Journal of Epidemiology. Okay. More striking is that U.S.-born Hispanic never smokers, both women and especially men, exhibit E50 levels lower than whites among never smoking. About 2 years lower for never smoking U.S.-born Hispanic men compared to whites. In other words, you can make Hispanic mortality look quite a bit worse for Hispanics than whites. The dark bars in comparison to the second bars compared to the dark bars of whites, and especially for men, there's about a 2-year difference there. The never smokers. So, in other words, smoking has been a huge deal for low mortality among foreign-born Hispanics, among U.S.-born Hispanics. It's been a really bad deal for whites. When you eliminate that, white life expectancy goes up quite a bit. Blacks do as well, but especially whites and especially white men. Okay, so it corresponds extraordinarily well with the results that you all publish using indirect methods. Okay, sum up this part, and before I move on to health stuff, lower SES works to seriously disadvantage both foreign-born and U.S.-born Hispanics relative to whites. Again, emphasize that almost everybody publishing in this area does not see that, recognize the net. Second, less smoking helps explain an important portion of the net mortality advantage among both foreign-born and especially U.S.-born Hispanics relative to whites. And it's consistent with the cause of death evidence shown above. So the smoking measures may not be great, but if you look at never smokers, these results really stand out. Okay, moving beyond mortality. How do important Hispanic health outcomes, chronic conditions, and disability correspond with those of mortality? I mean, there remains the possibility that low foreign-born Hispanic mortality is not real. Okay, the major reason noted by Poloni and Arias is that foreign-born Hispanics in the NHS go home to Mexico before dying. Okay, that could still happen in these data, even though I don't think it's happening very much because the life expectancies and mortality rates align so well with vital statistics data. But so to help address that, an analysis of at least decently reported chronic conditions and cross-sectional data can help shed light on this possibility. So if, for example, foreign-born Hispanics have high levels of chronic disease but low mortality, okay, that would not make sense. Okay? And outmigration following survey participation could be the reason. So let's look at this. I'm going to use HRS data here because these have these self-reports of major chronic conditions. So this looks at ages 58 plus, first for women and then for men, these 6 major chronic conditions. I just put up here, green is good, red is bad, and comparing these age-adjusted to whites. The 6 major health conditions line up quite well with mortality findings. There's lower or similar self-report for having cancer for Hispanics compared to whites. There's low and low for both Hispanic groups lung disease compared to whites. Hypertension and diabetes, which also we see in biomarker data, Crimmins published a few years ago, look worse for Hispanics. But lower or same heart disease and lower same reports of stroke correspond well with the mortality data as well. The biomarker studies don't assess cancer or lung functioning, so you can't really make a comparison there. But in a nutshell, when I compare to the biomarker data and compare to our own mortality findings, there's no red flags here. These line up pretty well with what we see in the mortality data. What doesn't is disability. Okay. Disability is much higher among Hispanics than among whites, both for the foreign-born and the U.S.-born. And that's similar for, this looks at men too. The patterns for men are fairly similar to those of, quite similar to those of women, but disability is really high. The disability measured here is, does the respondent have difficulty with dressing, walking, bathing, eating, or getting in and out of bed? Okay, these are, in reporting yes on any of these, qualifies as a person is having a disability. Okay, so this is kind of paradoxical. the disability findings. At least the chronic conditions lined up well with mortality. Disability did not. So to further dig into these, I look at using the HRS data again, disability prevalence for women, in this case men next, by race ethnicity. White women clearly stand out as having the lowest disability across most of the age range above 50, except right at the very end. Foreign-born Hispanic women are high or highest throughout the age range, very different than their mortality results. And U.S.-born Hispanic women are also relatively high compared to whites. Looks quite different than mortality. For men, again, white men look the best, and foreign-born Hispanic women have relatively low disability early in the age range. It's the UT-colored bar, kind of. And then it goes up pretty quickly with age. U.S.-born Hispanics and blacks also exhibit high disability throughout the age range. So these don't align very well with mortality. So one way to kind of put this together, disability and mortality, is through this multi-state life table approach. So the last thing I'll show you before I summarize. Multi-state life tables integrate mortality and disability information. Okay, you can look at the age rates of each of those, put them in a life table, and see how well it's a, as I say here, explicit way of assessing whether a Hispanic paradox in mortality is accompanied by a paradox in disability. Okay, most specifically, do foreign-born Hispanics' longer life expectancy correspond with the longer healthy life expectancy? And how does foreign-born and U.S.-born Hispanics' healthy and disabled life expectancy compare to blacks and whites? Okay, the pictures for Hispanics are not good here, as you might guess, given the prevalence data that I showed you. Foreign-born Hispanics' long lives are accompanied by the longest period of disability. So total life expectancy at age 50, across the top row, healthy life expectancy, no disabilities, disabled life expectancy with a disability, that those two add up to the total. Okay. So foreign-born Hispanics' long lives for women are accompanied by the longest period of disability. Longest lives, longest period of disability. Okay. U.S.-born Hispanics' disability is similar to blacks, although Hispanics live longer in a healthy state, and white women are very clearly advantaged in terms of the longest healthy life expectancy and the shortest disabled life expectancy. Okay. So long lives don't necessarily have to correspond with great health. Okay, patterns for men are a little, overall patterns are similar, a little less disability for men, but again, foreign-born Hispanics' long lives for males are accompanied by the longest periods of disability, whereas U.S.-born Hispanics' disability life expectancy is similar to blacks, and white men are clearly advantaged in terms of having the fewest years with living with a disability. Okay, I'm going to try to put this together now and raise questions. So on the upside, overall Hispanic mortality, I'm pretty confident, is quite favorable throughout the second half of the life course. The best two mortality data sets we have in the country show this, and they show very similar things. The Hispanic U.S.-born mortality is equivalent or lower, and foreign-born is lower than whites and much better than blacks. It's a clear match to the definition of the Hispanic paradox. This is good news. Okay, multiple data sets show this. There's a clear immigrant mortality advantage among Hispanics. It's pronounced at 60 and above. And Hispanic foreign-born and U.S.-born mortality is particularly low when smoking-related causes are considered. It's just hugely influenced by the white cohort smoking that was so prevalent in these pre-1950 birth cohorts. Okay, but U.S.-born Hispanics don't fare as well as immigrants. About 3-year lower life expectancy at age 50 and a worse health profile. Okay, those things corresponded well with one another. SES disadvantages are huge, and they affect Hispanic longevity. Mortality would be even lower for Hispanics with higher SES. And then disability among age 50 plus Hispanic adults, both women and men, are much less favorable than their mortality patterns. Haven't had time or data to dig into this yet, but it's clear that the Hispanic paradox does not extend to disability. Could be very difficult work lives. There's a great paper in Demography on that a few years ago. Very difficult caregiving lives for Hispanics. SES, one of my students has presented this at PEA this year, and poor access to health care, where therapies and tools to deal with disabilities are less available among Hispanics. There could be other reasons as well. We talked, Noreen and I, about obesity as well as potentially being an important factor here. Okay, I'll close with research implications. There's major challenges for the future and concerns. Challenges are kind of what demographers kind of do. These are fun things in terms of puzzles and data and that we should work on. Okay, there's a projected more than doubling of Hispanic population by 2050. So much work is going to be needed. The Hispanic population is increasingly U.S. born over that time period as well. Okay, all else equal, that compositional shift isn't good. Okay, but all else isn't equal. Identity shifts at the individual level could be important. In the HRS, 3% of Hispanics, these are older adults, become white over a 10-year period. Okay, so that comes into play here. Changing race ethnic definitions may come into play. The census is grappling with what to do with 2020. Doug's, you're on that panel. I mean, with the census panel, we're going to be looking at that issue. Migration will continue to make the understanding of Hispanic health and mortality patterns a major challenge. These are all tough issues, but fun issues for people like us. Heterogeneity among Hispanics, as I mentioned, national origin, legal status, generational status, and race will need to be addressed, and that's very hard to do even with the best data sets. Jenny Van Hook at Penn State, got this great project funded. I'm a consultant on this to take the NHIS and link it to immigration records. Got the permissions from the immigration folks to, so if people in the NHS are in the immigration records, you can find out when they came, why they came, and so forth. If they're not in the immigration data, well, they're probably undocumented. In the end, NCHS would not allow her to do that because they said people who answered the NHS never consented to link to non-health related data. So what we're working on right now is to try to figure out how undocumented status is influencing some of these findings, is putting probabilities of undocumented status on each person, on each foreign-born person in the NHIS. It's going to be a mess. I'm not sure we're going to get anything out of it, but we're working on it. Huge SES gaps between U.S.-born Hispanics and whites are not promising for the future Hispanic health patterns. I read something, I think it was from the Pew Foundation, that the wealth gaps between whites and Hispanics are 20 to 1 or something. It's just huge. So what that tells me as a mortality researcher is that we need to look at, when we can, life course data. The HRS collects some stuff on childhood conditions, and if we can get more and more data that's able to look at socioeconomic advantage and disadvantage over the life course, we might be able to make some headway on how SES is really influencing these groups. Okay, probably most important in my view to close out is that cohort change analyses are desperately needed. There's signs of higher young adult mortality among U.S.-born Hispanics. It could be a cohort phenomenon, a sign of bad trends to come. I mentioned to you that the ages 35 to 49 for U.S.-born Hispanic men, mortality did not look good. This survey that I'm involved with publishing this paper in a tobacco journal, the tobacco use patterns among young adult Hispanics, especially men, look horrible. Okay, 40% of U.S.-born Hispanic young men used tobacco in the last month. Every use is highest among Hispanic young men, and I never even knew some of these products that existed. There's e-cigarettes and hookah and all this stuff, and U.S.-born Hispanic men look bad on all this stuff. Cigars, little cigars. The highest of any group, U.S.-born Hispanic females, look the same as whites. So what you see here for these older adults is not what's happening now, and these people are going to get older. Very high obesity levels among young U.S.-born Hispanics. Sarah and Rachel Kimbrough and others here have published some of the best work on this, looking at kind of some of the very high obesity levels among young U.S.-born Hispanic kids. And then Noreen just sent me a paper about the much higher levels of obesity among recent Mexican immigrants as well. That obesity in Mexico has really gone up. So the immigrant composition is changing as well. So it's, that's something to be hugely concerned with. You put all this together, socioeconomic disadvantage, high levels of tobacco use, high levels of obesity, undocumented status, okay, and I have a lot of concerns about the future, about what we show here is not necessarily what we're going to see in 2050. So to close, at this point in time, I conclude that the Hispanic paradox, at least for mortality and for related chronic conditions, is probably real for now. It's more pronounced for foreign-born Hispanics, but clear for U.S.-born Hispanics as well, based on the original definition of Marquez and Coriel. But I worry, and I think with very good reason, that the paradox is a temporary phenomenon and will deserve our research community serious attention and policy community serious attention in the coming decades. So thanks for listening, and look forward to questions.